The morning began like any other at the Coronado military base in California. The sun hadn't fully risen when Sarah Mitchell entered the mess hall in her standard uniform. Her brown hair pulled back in a neat bun, no makeup, no adornment that might draw attention. At 28, she carried an invisible burden on her shoulders that few could bear. She had spent the last 5 years serving in operations that would never be mentioned in papers, facing dangers in hostile territory where a single mistake meant certain death. But on that quiet morning, within the safe confines of the base, she expected no confrontation. The mess hall buzzed with the characteristic energy of recruits in basic training. Hundreds of young men and women filled the tables, talking loudly, laughing, still adjusting to the military routine. Sarah picked up her tray of scrambled eggs, toast, and black coffee, looking for a discreet corner where she could eat in peace before her next appointment. She preferred to stay away from the crowds, avoiding questions and curious glances. Her job demanded anonymity, and she had learned to value every moment of tranquility. 3 recruits occupied a table near the entrance. Jake Henderson, a 22-year-old from Texas, with broad shoulders and an arrogant attitude he had developed as a quarterback in high school. Next to him was Marcus Webb, also 22, from New York, always eager to prove his masculinity through physical displays of strength. The third was Dylan Cooper, 23, from Pennsylvania, who followed the other 2 like a faithful shadow. The 3 had arrived at the base only 6 weeks ago and still carried that inflated confidence, typical of those who had never faced real danger. As Sarah walked past them, Jake nudged Marcus with his elbow. They began whispering to each other, glancing in her direction. Sarah noticed, but completely ignored. She was used to this kind of juvenile behavior. She sat at an empty table, in the opposite corner, her back to the wall, always keeping a clear view of the exit. Old fighting habits never died. Jake stood up first, followed by the other 2. They walked to Sarah's table with heavy, deliberate steps, drawing the attention of others in the cafeteria. Jake placed his hands on the table, leaning toward her with a smug smile that revealed overly white teeth. His breath smelled of strong coffee and cheap arrogance. "Hey girl, you're in the wrong place. This area is for military personnel, not for civilians who got lost on the base," Jake said, provoking laughter from his companions. Marcus crossed his arms, displaying biceps he had cultivated in urban gyms, but never tested in real-life situations. Dylan just watched, smiling nervously. Sarah chewed her toast calmly, not even raising her eyes. She had faced insurgent commanders, survived ambushes in the Middle East, rescued hostages from impossible situations. 3 arrogant boys posed no threat and didn't even deserve her full attention. She took a sip of coffee, savoring the hot, bitter liquid. "Are you listening to me? I don't think you understand. You need to get out of here before we call someone," Marcus insisted, stepping forward. His voice grew louder, trying to intimidate. Other recruits began to pay attention to the unfolding scene. Some stopped eating, waiting to see what would happen. Sarah finally looked up. Her icy blue eyes met Jake's with an intensity that made him unconsciously take a half step back. There was no anger in that look, only a cold, calculated assessment, as if she were measuring exactly how much effort it would take to neutralize them. It was the look of someone who had faced death countless times and survived not by luck, but by superior skill. "I suggest you return to your table," she said in a low but firm voice, each word pronounced with military precision. There was no apparent threat in her tone, just genuine advice that they should have followed. Jake misinterpreted her calmness as weakness. He walked around the table and stood beside her, deliberately invading her personal space. Marcus moved to the other side, while Dylan blocked the nearest exit route. They surrounded her, 3 large men against a seemingly ordinary. In the cafeteria, the noise decreased considerably. Everyone was watching now, some worried, others curious, no one intervening yet. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, darling?" Jake teased, reaching out as if to touch her shoulder. It was his mistake. It was also the last voluntary movement he would make for the next 45 seconds. Sarah moved with speed and precision that defied logic. Her left hand captured Jake's outstretched wrist as his body spun, using his own momentum against himself. In less than 2 seconds, Jake was face down on the floor, his arm twisted at a painful but controlled angle. His face pressed against the cold linoleum. He tried to scream, but Sarah had applied precise pressure to the nerve point, turning his scream into a muffled groan. Marcus reacted instinctively, lunging forward with a punch intended for the side of her head. Sarah was simply no longer there. She had moved with impossible fluidity, dodging as her right foot met the back of Marcus's knee. His leg buckled, and Sarah used the momentum to send him flying straight into an empty chair. The impact wasn't severe enough to cause permanent damage, but definitely severe to leave him stunned. Trying to catch his breath, Dylan, seeing his two friends neutralized in a matter of seconds, hesitated. He was smarter than the others, or at least more cautious, but he had gone too far to back down without completely losing face in front of everyone present. He advanced more cautiously, trying to grab her in a bear hug from behind. Sarah sensed his approach through the heightened peripheral vision that had saved her life dozens of times in combat zones. She suddenly ducked, her center of gravity shifting so that Dylan grasped only air. Using her hip as a fulcrum, Sarah executed a classic projection that sent Dylan flying over her. He landed on his back on the table she had been using, trays and plates scattering in all directions. Scrambled eggs flew through the air, coffee spilled into dark puddles, and silverware clinked on the floor in a metallic cacophony. From beginning to end, 45 seconds had elapsed. 3 recruits lay in various positions of defeat and confusion. Sarah remained standing, her breathing not even altered, her uniform still immaculate, except for a small coffee stain on the sleeve. She looked at the 3 with an expression that mixed disappointment and weariness, like a teacher dealing with particularly slow student. The mess hall had fallen completely silent. Hundreds of pairs of eyes were fixed on the sea, gaping in astonishment. Then the side door opened and Commander Thomas Reeves entered, drawn by the commotion. He was a man in his 50s, bald, with a posture that suggested decades of military service. His eyes quickly scanned the scene, assessing what had happened. "Lieutenant Mitchell," he said, his voice echoing in the silence. "I presume there was some provocation?" There was no accusation in his tone, only professional curiosity. He had known Sarah for years, had served on 2 missions with her when he was still a captain. He knew exactly what she was capable of. "Just a misunderstanding, sir," Sarah replied, straightening up to attention. "Nothing that can't be resolved with additional training for these." She cast a meaningful glance at the 3 on the ground. Jake finally managed to sit up, massaging his aching wrist. Marcus was still trying to fully catch his breath, leaning on the chair that had broken when he fell. Dylan rolled off the table, falling to his knees on the floor, covered in food scraps and completely humiliated. Commander Reeves walked slowly toward the 3 recruits. "Stand up," he ordered curtly. The 3 obeyed reluctantly, forming an irregular line, avoiding direct eye contact with anyone. "Do you have any idea who you just attacked?" Silent. "That's Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, SEAL Team 6, decorated with the Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts, and more ranks than the 3 of you together will ever see. She has participated in over 40 missions in hostile territory and has more hours of actual combat than you have accumulated in sleep since you were born." Jake felt the blood drain from his face. Marcus closed his eyes, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. Dylan looked like he was about to vomit. Not from his injuries, but from the utter humiliation. They had tried to intimidate one of the most experienced elite operators in the United States Navy, someone who had faced real threats in places they couldn't even locate on a map. "Sir, we didn't know, sir," Jake managed to articulate, his voice breaking slightly. It was a pathetic excuse, and everyone knew it. Ignorance didn't justify aggressive behavior, especially in a military environment where respect and discipline were fundamental. "You didn't know because you didn't bother to find out," Reeves interrupted. "You saw a woman and assumed she didn't belong here, that she was inferior, that she could be intimidated. That kind of thinking not only has no place in the armed forces, but it can cost lives in real-life situations." He paused, letting the words sink in. "From now on, the 3 of you will have extra training sessions every day at 5 in the morning. You will learn discipline, respect, and perhaps, if you're lucky, a fraction of what it means to be a true operator. Dismiss." The 3 limped away, followed by disdainful glances and muffled laughter from the other recruits. The story was already spreading. It would be told and retold for months, perhaps years. It would become a base legend, a cautionary tale about underestimating anyone based solely on appearance. Sarah sat down again, taking a fresh piece of toast from an untouched tray someone had brought her. Commander Reeves pulled up a chair and sat down opposite her, smiling slightly. "You held back," he observed. "You could have hospitalized them if you wanted to. They're young and stupid, sir. Not malicious, just ignorant. They deserved a lesson, not permanent injury," Sarah replied, biting into her toast. "Besides, you know I don't like drawing attention to myself." Reeves chuckled, a deep, genuine laugh. "Well, I think the ship has sailed on that point, Lieutenant. By the end of the day, half the base will know what happened here. By the end of the week, it will be half the West Coast." He grew serious again. "Are you all right? I know situations like this can bring back bad memories." Sarah appreciated the genuine concern in his voice. Reeves was one of the few who knew about some of the traumas she carried. Missions that had gone wrong, lost comrades, impossible decisions made in seconds. "I'm fine, sir. It was just another day at the office, so to speak." In the following weeks, Jake, Marcus, and Dylan were transformed. The extra training sessions were brutal, designed not to punish them, but to truly educate them. They learned about women serving in special forces, about the barriers they face, about the absolute excellence required to prove themselves repeatedly in male-dominated environments. They studied military history, cases of female warriors throughout the ages, modern operators who accomplished extraordinary feats far from the spotlight. A month after the incident, Jake found the courage to look for Sarah. She was on the running track, completing her daily miles at dawn. He waited respectfully until she finished, keeping a safe distance. When she stopped, wiping the sweat from her brow, he cautiously approached. "Lieutenant Mitchell." "Sir, Madam, I'm sorry," he began, stumbling over his words. "I want to properly apologize for my behavior that day. I have no excuse for how I acted. It was disrespectful, inappropriate, and completely unacceptable. I've spent the last few weeks learning about SEALs, about your service, and I realize now that I haven't even scratched the surface of what you've accomplished. I just wanted you to know that I'm deeply grateful for the lesson you taught me, and that I'm working every day to be better." Sarah studied his face, seeing genuine sincerity there. He had visibly matured, lost that youthful arrogance, replaced by humility born of true understanding. "Apology accepted, Henderson," she finally said. "Use this experience to be better not only as a soldier, but as a human being. Never judge anyone by their appearance, gender, or any other superficial characteristic. Judge them by their actions, their character, their ability. Do that, and you will go far." Jake nodded vigorously, relieved. "Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am." He hesitated, then asked timidly, "May I ask a question?" Sarah nodded. "How did you become so capable?" Sarah smiled slightly, a rare smile that briefly lit up her usually serious face. "Practice, Henderson. Thousands of hours of practice, training you can't even imagine, real-life situations where failure means death. And most importantly, never underestimating anyone and never being underestimated motivated me to be better every day. Use the doubts of others as fuel, not as an excuse." The story of the mess hall incident became exactly what Reeves had predicted, a legend, but it wasn't told as a joke. It was recounted with respect, used by instructors as an example of why prejudice had no place in the armed forces, why each person deserved to be evaluated on their individual merits. Sarah Mitchell became an almost mythical figure on the base, universally respected not for the incident, but for what it revealed about her character and ability. Years later, when Jake Henderson eventually qualified for SEAL Bud S training, he carried with him that lesson learned in the cafeteria. He became a staunch advocate for inclusion, a defender of evaluating people by ability rather than superficial characteristics. And whenever he faced doubts or difficulty, he remembered that morning when an ordinary-looking woman demonstrated in 45 seconds that she was extraordinary. Sarah Mitchell never imagined that incident would completely transform the dynamics of the base. In the weeks that followed, she noticed subtle but significant changes in how she was treated by the recruits. The looks that had previously carried doubt or condescension were replaced by genuine respect. As she walked through the corridors, young soldiers respectfully stepped aside, greeting her with nods and appropriate military salute. Some watched her with barely disguised admiration, clearly wanting to approach, but hesitating out of reverence or nervousness. Sarah's routine remained relentlessly consistent. She woke at 4:30 every morning, regardless of the weather or how little sleep she had gotten. Her first appointment was always a 10-kilometer run around the base, followed by an hour of strength training in the gym that few frequented at that early hour. She preferred the silence of the early morning, when she could concentrate completely on her body and mind without distractions or curious onlookers. Then came the flexibility and mobility exercises, essential for maintaining the physical capacity needed for special operation. Each movement was executed with calculated precision. Each repetition counted mentally, while her mind also processed reports she had read the previous night. After physical training, Sarah would take a quick but meticulous shower, put on her impeccably pressed uniform, and head to the cafeteria. Now, whenever she entered, there was a collective recognition. Conversations didn't completely cease as they had on that fateful morning, but there was an awareness of her presence. She continued to choose secluded tables, preferring to eat alone while mentally reviewing the day's commitment. Her mornings usually included intelligence meetings, tactical planning sessions, and analysis of past missions to extract lessons that could save future lives. Marcus Webb took longer than Jake to fully process what had happened. Coming from a tough neighborhood in the Bronx, he had learned early on that physical strength was valuable currency, that intimidation worked, that a tough appearance protected against real threats. These lessons served him well on the streets of New York, but proved dangerously inadequate in the military environment. During the extra training sessions, he initially struggled with humiliation, with the wounded ego that screamed that it had been luck, that in another situation, the outcome would have been different. But the instructor assigned to supervise the 3 recruits' extra training was Sergeant Rachel Torres, a 15-year veteran who had served in multiple theaters of operation. She had no patience for fragile male egos or excuses. On the 3rd day, when Marcus muttered something about being caught off guard, Torres stopped the entire exercise and made the 3 stand at attention for a full 20 minutes while she spoke. Do you think the enemy will give you a warning before attacking? Do you think terrorists in Kabul will wait for you to be ready before detonating an explosive device? Real war has no rules of fair play, no referee, no second chances, she said, her voice cutting through the cold morning air. Lieutenant Mitchell neutralized the 3 of you in less than a minute without even losing her breath, because she trained for years for situations where a second of hesitation means death. Do you want to know why she's a SEAL and you're here doing push-ups in the mud? Because she understands that preparation is everything, that respect is earned through competence, and that underestimating any adversary is an invitation to disaster. Marcus began to understand. Each extra exercise, each additional kilometer run, each extra hour at the gym was not punishment, but opportunity. Torres exposed them to real stories of female military operators, documented cases of women who had saved the lives of their male comrades, who had completed impossible missions, who had demonstrated extraordinary courage under enemy fire. He learned about helicopter pilots who had flown rescue missions in impossible conditions, about intelligence analysts whose meticulous work had prevented terrorist attacks, about combat medics who had kept soldiers alive in desperate circumstances. Dylan Cooper had a different reaction. He came from a traditional military family in Pennsylvania, where his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather had served. He grew up hearing stories of military heroism, but all of these stories featured men as protagonists. Women in his family narratives were always supporting figures. Wives waiting at home, nurses caring for the wounded, never warriors on the front line. The incident with Sarah forced him to confront decades of unexamined assumptions. During one of the training sessions, Torres assigned the 3 of them to research and present reports on women in the armed forces. Dylan chose to focus on the history of women's fighter pilots. He was genuinely shocked to discover the barriers they had faced, how exceptionally talented pilots had been systematically excluded from combat positions, not for lack of ability, but for institutionalized bias. He read about women who had outperformed men in flight tests, who had demonstrated superior skills in combat simulation, but were still relegated to support roles for decades. He was particularly impacted by the story of a female pilot who had been shot down in hostile territory, managed to evade capture for 3 days with serious injuries, and was finally rescued after killing 2 enemy combatants in self-defense, with only a pistol and limited ammunition. When Dylan presented his report to Torres and his comrades, his voice trembled with genuine emotion. I realized that all my life I had been taught an incomplete version of military history. I was taught that heroism had a specific gender, and that lie made me less capable as a soldier. Sarah observed these transformations from a distance, without directly involving herself but aware of the changes. She had never wanted to be a symbol or figure of inspiration. She simply wanted to do her job with excellence, serve her country effectively, and perhaps survive long enough to eventually retire and find some kind of peace. But she recognized that, whether she wanted to or not, her presence and actions had an impact. Other instructors began to cite her in classes, using the incident as an example of why constant training mattered, why never underestimating adversaries was essential, why diversity in the armed forces strengthened rather than weakened. One afternoon, Sarah was summoned to Commander Reeves's office. He sat behind his desk, laden with papers, his computer screen displaying classified reports, which he quickly minimized when she entered. "Take a seat, Mitchell," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite. She sat down, maintaining an upright posture, her hands resting calmly in her lap. "I received an interesting proposal that I want to discuss with you." Reeves explained that the command was developing a pilot program to improve recruit training regarding diversity, inclusion, and operational effectiveness. They wanted someone with real combat experience to lead training sessions, sharing practical perspectives instead of abstract theories. They immediately thought of Sarah. "I know this is outside your normal responsibilities, and I know you value your privacy," Reeves said, "but your impact here is already being felt. Imagine what you could intentionally do." Sarah remained silent for a long moment, considering. Part of her resisted the idea of becoming more visible, of opening up aspects of her experience that she preferred to keep private. But another part, the part that had chosen to serve in the first place, recognized the opportunity to make a real difference. "May I think about it, sir?" he finally asked. Reeves nodded. "I need an answer in a week." In the following days, Sarah found herself observing the recruits with a new perspective. She saw young people from all backgrounds, each carrying their own unexamined assumptions and biases. Some demonstrated genuine openness, curiosity about different perspectives. Others carried visible resistance, clinging to old ideas about gender roles and capabilities. She thought of all the female operators she had known over the years. Extraordinary women whose stories would never be told publicly for reasons of classified security. She thought of the barriers they had all faced, proving themselves repeatedly in ways that male colleagues never needed to. Jake Henderson began to seek out Sarah regularly, always respectful, always mindful not to take up too much of her time. He asked questions about training, about the mindset needed for special operations, about how to deal with fear in combat situations. Sarah answered when she had time, appreciating his genuine sincerity. In one of these conversations, Jake admitted that he had grown up in an environment where men were valued for their physical strength and women for their looks. "My school had football teams that received all the funding and attention, while women's teams in other sports barely had adequate equipment," he said. "I never questioned that until now." Sarah shared a story of a mission where her operational partner, a woman named Lieutenant Jen Rodriguez, had saved the lives of the entire team. They were extracting a high-value target in a hostile urban area when they were ambushed. The planned escape route was blocked by heavily armed enemy combatant. Rodriguez, who had extensive demolition training, improvised an explosive device using available materials and created a new exit through a reinforced concrete wall. She did this under heavy fire with an arm injury, while maintaining calm communication with command, explaining what she was doing, said Sarah. "Many men on our team admitted afterward that they would have paid. She simply did what needed to be done." Marcus began applying lessons learned in his daily interactions. He observed a female recruit at the gym struggling with a specific weightlifting exercise. Instead of assuming she was weak or incapable, he offered tips on form and technique that he had learned. He discovered that she was new to the specific exercise but extraordinarily strong in other areas, particularly cardiovascular endurance, where she consistently outperformed most men. They began training together occasionally, each learning from the other's strengths. Marcus realized that collaboration was more effective than competition, that recognizing diverse capabilities strengthened everyone. Dylan wrote a long letter to her father, sharing what she had learned. She described the mess hall incident with brutal honesty about her own behavior. She explained the lessons she was absorbing, the changes in her perspective. Her father responded weeks later with a surprisingly reflective letter admitting that his own generation had failed to recognize the full contributions of women in the armed forces. "I'm proud of you for having the courage to change," he wrote. "That takes more strength than simply following what you've always been taught." Sarah finally decided to accept Reeves' offer. Not because she wanted attention or recognition, but because she recognized the responsibility. How many other incidents like the one in the cafeteria had happened at bases around the world? How much talent was wasted because people were judged by superficial characteristics instead of real ability? If her experience could help change a mind, prevent unnecessary conflict, improve operational effectiveness, then it was worth the personal discomfort.